What's the deepest darkest secret you know that isn't your own? I'm late, but I guess my story qualifies for this topic. Some time ago one of my best friends found out that his mother was raped by a guy he knew. The rape happened like 30 years ago. My friend told me he's gonna kill the guy. Few months after that I found out the rapist was declared missing and they never found him. I'm pretty sure my friend killed him. Kudos for not leaving a trail. Op is the trail now. R.I.P. Opus. Vanilla Ice is the father of one of my cousins. He was on tour in the area and apparently my aunt had a thing with him after a gig. My cousin looks just like a female version of him and nothing like her sisters. Nobody mentions why she looks different, and I only found out because my mum told me when she was drunk at a family party years ago. Wait, so that means your cousin is an ice baby. Edit, thanks for the first gold. Alright. Stop. I know a guy that smothered his infant brother when he was 4 years old. Parents still think it was SIDS. Holy shit. That's awful. He said he remembers the baby crying and putting a pillow over his head until it stopped. He turned into a heroin addict at 17. It is awful. A woman I knew only married her boyfriend just so her ailing mother could see her married before she died. Then she got pregnant by the dude's best friend and divorced the poor lad to be with his best friend. Straight out of a soap opera. I still feel for the dude and it's been 6 years. I'm assuming the guy she married didn't know why she married him. That's just cruel to mess with someone like that. He thought she loved him and that he was happy and lucky. He never saw it coming. Sadly, no one in our friend circle did. My mother's stepfather raped her several times and molested her from the time he married my grandmother until mom moved out. My grandmother knew, but because the abuser was so good to her, Aka gave her his paychecks and took her out a lot, she ignored it. When mom confronted her, around age 12, about it, she told my mother it was her fault for being such a slut and nice girls don't get touched by grown men. Grandma told the family the same thing when I admitted to being molested to my parents and they went to the police. The bitch told our entire extended family what had happened and that I must have been begging for it because nice girls don't have those things happen to them. TL. Doctor, my grandmother is a monster. Maybe you should slyly mention that nice old women don't slip down the stairs on accident. I just don't have anything to do with her. When she dies I may take the time to go back to my home state and spit on her on the coffin. But then, I might not even take that much trouble out of my day. She is a monster. A horrible human being. But at least I could go to another state and lick my emotional wounds. She has to live with herself. Local family in a very small place I used to live. From ethnic minority. Find their daughter has been sexually assaulted by local guy. They start asking around for contract killers and, implausibly, considering how indiscreet and hapless they were about it, find one. The molester's death, just days later, is ruled as suicide. Everyone who knew him knew he didn't have a gun and didn't have suicidal tendencies. Even the coroner doesn't seem concerned that he managed to shoot himself in the side of the head. Twice. Nothing ever comes of it. I know what happened. And why. And I've decided to keep my peace. Shooting yourself in the head multiple times is extremely possible. You really don't die immediately and sometimes you might have to finish the job. Link. Wikipedia. org/wiki/multiple_gunshot_suicide. Tilwiki really does have articles about everything. Two of my good friends, one guy and one girl, were both repeatedly raped as children by the pastors of their churches. Same state, different churches. The girl's pastor was her father. No one else knows. A former co-worker I'd known for about half an hour told me about an inoperable tumor on her spine that keeps her in constant pain, so she's always doped up on pain meds. It also causes incontinence, so she wets the bed almost every night. I was born with one of those faces that says, "Please, tell me something incredibly personal. I have no idea how to appropriately respond to it. It's an uncomfortable honor." You're probably a good listener. I try to be. They probably just want to tell someone, and that takes guts. All I have to do is make sympathetic noise in the pauses and resist the urge to make some horrible joke, and I've served my purpose. It makes sense that they'd want a good listener instead of a good talker. My granddad was recently buried, but before that my mum told me that he sexually abused her when she was younger. She told her nan who beat her for lying. Apparently he also abused my older sister, but she doesn't recall this, and it's nothing we can talk about. I don't want to be rude, but I would like to get advice and know your opinion. Would you recommend that parents tell those things to their children? I mean, would you in retrospect rather not know, or are you okay that your mom shared it with you? Did it change how you see her in any way? I know many parents would want to hide the reality from their children to make themselves and their family seem perfect and okay, but those are the actions that perpetuate abusive cycles. Honest communication is the only thing that can help survivors and prevent later abuse. Imagine every immediate family was honest about rape and abuse and how much lower the incidence afterwards would be. The kids learn the horrible effects of abuse and put a face to the victims and the abusers. They will never repeat those actions on anyone, and they know who to trust to prevent the same actions from happening to them. Backup account for anonymity. I know a guy that was going to break up with his girlfriend one night after a date. He was dropping her off at home. They walked in to find her dad dead on the floor, so he didn't break it off. 35 years later, they are still married, and that's the story of how I almost never existed. Unless every day for the last 35 years, your parents have walked into the house and found a dead relative, I'm going to assume they fell in love and things are now okay. I'm gonna assume the former because that's hilarious. A friend of mine has a daughter. His wife doesn't know. My dad and mom had me on prom night. Obvious accident. He was 15, she was 17. By the time I was born they were both a year older and almost broken up. They seriously considered aborting me, but ended up waiting too long anyways. They don't know I know. I mean I don't care. It was 20 years ago, and I know they love me and don't regret ruining their teenage life because of my existence in the least bit. Edit. I have several pictures that I took of pictures. Sorry, on my phone. If anyone want to see them just say so. I don't wanna randomly post picture of my wrinkly incubated baby self without provocation. How did you find out? The guy running the local Chinese place is Korean. Not Chinese. The entire place is basically one big lie. Sometimes it keeps me up at night. I once confronted the owners of a Thai restaurant on this. They were all talking to each other in Chinese, and because I speak a little bit I just asked, "You guys are Chinese? And you own a Thai place?" They were in shock. Like a deer caught by the eyes for fraud, headlight shocked. PFFT. That's nothing. There's a Chinese couple who run a Mexican restaurant across the street from me. That my parents were actually smoking crack with baby sister in the bedroom when she started having a seizure. I was only 6 or 7 and at a neighbor's house at the time and thought my sister was just having a weird medical emergency. She was fine and recovered, but it wasn't until years later that my dad confided with me about this during one of his severe bout of depression. Am I to understand that the drugs cause the seizures? Yes. My parents kept it from the EMTs and doctors and played it off like it just happened out of nowhere. Nobody questioned them about it, and she was out of the hospital within a week. The doctors did monitor her for about a year after in case she had epilepsy, but she was never diagnosed with it. My ex-boyfriend from high school's uncle was killed because he passed out drunk on a train track. He got split into almost perfectly center, vertically. His family won't tell him because they were close. That was 20 years ago. How did that news not spread around town? What did they tell him happened? Uncle Gar is half the man he used to be. When I was in Vietnam, a fairly popular officer was lost on a ambush. It turned out a few days later he was found by several of his men raping a Vietnamese child and tried, sentenced and executed in the field by his unit. Lots of questions were asked. Not many answers were to be had. Plenty of crazy shit is buried forever in that soil. My father didn't go to Nam, but his best friend from childhood did. Apparently, his friend came back from the war and became a recluse. Refused to go anywhere, talk to anyone, or do anything. Anything that was normal was out. My father bumped into him almost 10 years after the war. His buddy was drunk in a local bar. My dad asked him, "What happened to you?" His buddy replied, "I played catch using babies. Duck that war." A guy that worked for my dad was in Nam. He said that they had to find and kill a sniper once, and the snipers were some little kids ducked up on opium. I know numerous guys who were repeatedly and seriously sexually assaulted as kids. One told me directly, one alluded to it repeatedly, and left no doubt that it happened, and another doesn't know that I know, but would trust me to keep his secret. When I was around 8, my neighbor would regularly coerce me into performing oral on him. I didn't understand anything about the situation, that it had a sexual context, that it was abnormal, it was just a secret I was supposed to keep. A few years later, as I matured, I began to realize that I had been violated, but more revoltingly, I also recalled actively enjoying the attention from an adult at the time. I've been fighting the compound effects of this for years. It started with developing an addiction to porn at 12. I tried to have sex when I was 13, but instead had a panic attack. I still have them to this day. By 16 I was severely depressed and suicidal. I figured, given my fear of intimacy with women, that I must just be gay. So I tried that. Found a guy in his 50s who came and picked me up at the mall. He drove me to a secluded parking spot. I started having another panic attack. He forces me to grab his erection. I cry. He calls me names. Kicks me out. Nope, not gay. I tried to odd that night on Tylenol, which is another story entirely. Fast forward to now. I'm 28. I still have panic attacks when I try to be intimate. It takes me months to be comfortable enough with a woman to try anything sexual. Honestly, I'm pretty sure I'll never be normal, or that those memories will ever stop haunting me. I still won't tell anyone I know personally. Dude, are you in therapy? I know that talking about trauma sucks, but it's my experience. I'm a mental health clinician, that the only way to get through trauma like that is with an ongoing relationship with a therapist you are able to build a rapport with. I know you won't tell anyone you know, but a therapist has heard it all and bound by confidentiality. I know my mom has cancer, but she doesn't tell me because she doesn't want me to worry. So I'm saving up to help her with her bucket list. She doesn't know it's so SHHHH. But I heard her say she wanted to go back to Ireland and at some point see the Vatican. I'd love to just pop up in a cafe she's at and take her to get pampered. So now you know my secret. Don't tell mom. A close friend of mine drunkenly confessed to me the details of his first sexual experience. The story went that when he was around the age of 14 and his brother around 13, they would frequently masturbate together. In the grand scheme of things this wouldn't be so weird, but it eventually progressed to jacking each other off. And then to his little brother ducking him in the ass. Supposedly it happened a few times, and each time they both acted like one thing just led to another. They're both in their mid-20s now and supposedly never acknowledge it. Knowing this makes me wonder how many people really do participate in voluntary incest and are just too ashamed to ever tell anyone. This reminds me of a story I read recently on AskReddit about a guy who went over his friend's house and while him, his friend, and his friend's older brother played cards, his friend and his older brother whipped out their penis and started jacking off in front of him like it was completely normal. My buddy's brother got a DUI and his license taken. His brother proceeded to hide it from his wife for 2 weeks. They went on a family vacation. A situation came up where he needed a license, and everything melted down. He was drunk, tried to throw himself overboard, and ended up in the ship's jail. His wife left with the kids. My buddy has been driving his brother around for 2 months because an expensive part on his car went and he doesn't have the extra dollar sign to fix it right now. Apostrophe. A girl I used to be friends with confided in me once that she had been raped by a group of seniors at her high school when she was a sophomore. She never reported it and didn't even speak of it to anyone else till years later. Normally that would be really dark by itself. But it doesn't end there. We were drinking one night a few months after she told me about what had happened and she elaborated. She was relatively sexually inexperienced when it happened, and she claimed it fundamentally ducked her up in the head. It became a fetish for her. She said she was filled with shame and fear, but that the thought of it happening again turned her on more than anything else ever had. She told me that she first tried to recreate the scenario in her last year of undergrad by convincing a few fraternity guys to gangbang her after a party. They were game, and she said she enjoyed it, but it wasn't the same. She craved the real deal. Something I don't pretend to even begin to understand. But to each their own. Her explanation of her ideal peak sexual scenario basically entailed an actual rapist / group of rapists raping her without knowing that she was actually willing. I haven't talked to her in a couple years. We lost touch when I moved out of state. Facebook says she's in a relationship and I truly hope she finds happiness. Wow. It's things like this that truly make me amazed by the human mind. I guess it's a defense mechanism, you know. If the mind forces her to enjoy the thought of it, it might protect her from the trauma. Just a theory on it. My once best friend has a secret tryst with her father. She sleeps with him, and he provides her with all the utilities, college tuition, and money to spend. Her mother knows that her father was cheating on her, and their marriage was ruined because of adultery. Nonetheless, she doesn't know who the real homewrecker is. It sounds like the real homewrecker is the father. A good friend of mine's first sexual experience was with his mom, while his stepfather taunted him that he wasn't a real man unless he came. He was 9 years old at the time. TL. Doctor, my friend is a real methodica, and it's tragic. Fake names used. This story starts in the 1940s. Lila gets engaged to Edward, but a younger sister, Wanda, entices Edward and runs off with him, and they get married. A daughter, Tess, is born. But things don't last long for Wanda and Edward and they divorce. Wanda later marries Jim. Tess, the daughter, reaches the age of 15, and Jim begins raping her. Confused, scared and hurt, Tess tells her mother that Jim, the stepfather, has been raping her. Her mother believes her at first but later goes into a state of denial because life as a single mother in the early 1960s is too hard to bear. In fact, the whole thing is too hard to emotionally deal with, so denial comes into play. Tess feels trapped, and she decides that her only escape is to find someone in high school that will get her pregnant and thus end her nightmare. She succeeds. And that's the story of how I was born. It really freaked with my mind for a while when I first learned about it in my early 40s. Late to the party, but my dad was adopted by his uncle and aunt. I never knew about it until I was 19 and my grandmother, my dad's biological aunt, died. After her funeral, my dad sat me down and told me that his real mother had committed suicide and his biological father couldn't handle raising a 5-year-old boy on his own. His bio dad's brother, my grandfather, and his wife couldn't have children. So they decided to raise my dad as their own. I was never allowed to talk about it for fear of hurting my adoptive grandfather. For the 15 years in between the passing of my grandmother and grandfather, we didn't talk about it. One of my best friends cheated on her husband, got pregnant, got divorced, moved to Arizona, live in MN, had the baby, gave it up for adoption. No one knew for a long time. I still don't think her ex-husband knows. The guy who got her pregnant found out and has spent years trying to get in contact with his daughter and has attempted to get custody. All the while, my friend has had contact as it was an open adoption. The family sends my friend birthday cards, flowers, and pictures. Your friend sounds like a piece of work. What amazes me in these situations is that people will know about these things and still be like, yeah, we are still friends. They're cool to hang out with. I don't think I could remain friends with someone like that. I know that my first cousin is my sister. None of the parents or my cousin/sister know that I know. My father got my mother's sister pregnant. Tell your dad that you're in a relationship with your cousin. Tell him that she's pregnant. Tell him that you want to marry her, and you'd want him to be the best man. Watch him sweat. Reminds me of an episode of House when an interracial couple goes to get some help. The father hated that his son was dating this black girl, and they thought he was racist. Turns out he hated her and didn't want her to be with him because she was his half sister and his daughter from another woman. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.